Like if I take a guy down in a fight and he's not threatening to submit me in any way, then he didn't beat me in that round. But if there's a guy that I take down and he's going triangle omoplata, trying to force my head into a guillotine position, trying to force my arm into a Kimura position, like that guy's actively working from the bottom, and that doesn't give me much time for my own offense.
Hello, friends. Thank you for tuning into this week's episode of the Mayn Idea Podcast, where today I have the pleasure of sitting down with Lance Palmer. A quick reminder for those of you that enjoy this podcast, please take 30 seconds and leave a 5-star review on Apple or Spotify and subscribe to the YouTube channel. This helps the show get discovered organically and helps me continually bring on amazing guests. There are also now timestamps in the show notes, so feel free to jump around to the part that interests you most, although I always recommend listening to the episode in its entirety. Lance Palmer is an American mixed martial artist from Akron, Ohio, who went to Ohio State University, where he was a 4-time All-American and 2-time NCAA champion. In addition to his wrestling accolades, Lance has won IBJJF World No-Gi Championships, as well as earned the title of 2-time PFL Featherweight Champion. I had a blast talking about everything from strength training and Jiu Jitsu to family sobriety and the mindset necessary to step foot into your first sparring session at the legendary Team Alpha Male. I hope that you enjoyed this episode as much as I did. Without further ado, Lance Palmer. It's good to be here. Well, Lance, thank you for taking the time. Busy man, as we were just saying, from fighting to doing your own projects, running your own businesses, and working hard 24/7. So taking time out of that to be here, it really means a lot, man.
It's awesome. I'm glad we were able to get it scheduled to where I could actually be in the comfort of my own home instead of out on a job.
Yeah, I was. You were literally you had a patio project going on in the background, which begs the question: what is a professional fighter doing, running a landscaping and architecture business?
I've kind of got into it in 2018, and I was into landscape and tree removal and stuff like that through college. That was kind of how I made money in the summer, working for a guy who I knew through wrestling. He basically had a family business as an arborist and removing trees and stumps and stuff like that. So I kind of got into it in high school originally, but more so fell into it in 2018. I had a business partner for 2 years, and then I went on my own in 2020, basically right when COVID started, and there was it was really high demand that year, honestly. So it was a good year to kind of pick up with the landscape business, and obviously that was a year that I didn't get to fight, so that was full time for that, and just kind of build the business up and build my skill set up with patios and other things like that for the business.
I always wonder, do you think that that's a work ethic thing that's just like ingrained in you? Sometimes fighters spend their earnings in very different ways, and I think just people in general in society, the way that they represent themselves in their communities, with family, with friends, it seems to change a lot, right? As they gain success, as they reach higher levels in different athletics. What is it about you think that lends itself to this person that seemingly has not forgotten at all who they were and where they came from, and it's actually going out of your way to maintain these parts of who you are and to maintain businesses on the outside of your fight career, despite being a 2-time champion, an elite wrestler, someone who can just step in and win worlds at jiu-jitsu. By all measures of the word, right, you're an elite level athlete. Why maintain these other endeavors in your life?
I think of it as, and it is definitely, back to your first point, it's a work ethic thing, because I've always had my own type of work ethic, even as a kid. When I first started wrestling, and my dad started putting us through these little workouts of like pull-ups, push-ups, and sit-ups just to get some basic like strength as a kid without lifting weights and doing things that really as a young kid it was kind of frowned upon. So we wanted to just do the basics. And
Right.
even with those little workouts, it was, if there were 20 reps, I would do 20 reps. If there was 100 reps, I would do 100 reps. I never had that. Obviously, like there's times where you don't want to do it, but I never had that mindset of, well, if I only do 18 pull-ups, nobody's going to notice. Or if I only do this many, nobody's going to notice. And it's still with me today. I mean, obviously there's days I don't want to do the things that I'm doing, but I do it anyway. And there's a lot of times that I've gone through, even in my college wrestling career, where I really didn't want to put the work in that day, or I just didn't, I didn't feel like pushing myself to my limits. And once you're in it and you start getting moving and you start warming up and you get into practice, all that kind of went away. I've always just had that mindset, and I don't know if that was just something I've had since I was born, because it really wasn't. My dad pushed us to, make ourselves better and do all these things and have the right mentality to be successful. But I think a lot of it came before that, and I was always just this type of person of where I always feel the need to work and just work hard no matter what it is. Like this morning I went and sparred with Matt Brown and a few other guys locally here because he's
but they're like very low level fighters, so that doesn't count, right? Just absolute war dogs.
Yeah, I mean, like Matt Brown's the KO king. Like that guy, it's awesome to be able to train with him. Yeah. So I went to practice and trained with him from like 10 to 12, and then went out to power wash a patio when it's pouring down rain and like tornado weather. But I mean, that's just who I am as a person. I'm not really like, there's days where I like to be lazy, or rest days, or I like to lay around, but it's not really in my DNA. Like I go work on my truck or on my car or something when I don't go out and go to a job, or if I'm not at practice. Like I'm always doing something. And there's some days where I'm like, man, I need to slow down for just a second and like regroup my mind, because I can do so many things at once to the point where I'm like, all right, well, what the heck was I doing before? Like I get to this point where I'm just like the snowball effect of everything rolling and rolling, but then it gets to a point where I'm like, all right, I need to hone this in and bring everything back to where it started, which is just focusing on one thing at a time. And that was kind of, that's kind of something that every few months I feel like I need to do, because I either get new ideas or get things that, I feel like I could be good at and successful at, with either on the business side of things or just new things physically. So the work ethic thing is I guess it's like a blessing and a curse, because I feel like I reach myself too far sometimes, and then I have to pull myself back in and, kind of regroup and reassess what the important things are right now, especially with having a family, having a wife, and having 2 kids. That's where it kind of, I notice it more now, because there are more important things than all these other outside factors. So that's kind of where I can kind of self-reflect a little bit more instead of just always go, go, go. I do it a little less now. It's still something that I'm working on, but I feel like once I do decide to be done fighting, it'll be a lot easier for me to kind of put my energy elsewhere.
And you'll have a foundation, so to speak, that you've established simultaneously, right? So it's not like the rug will be ripped out from under you. You're self-aware of the day that might happen, so you're setting yourself up for. If we can linger on the this motivation thing, I find this really interesting, especially in situations where someone has a sibling. And I've heard you speak about the athletic talent of your brother and your guys' time as children, and your talents in wrestling, the powerful relationship you had with your father, who you both looked up to and was also able to drive you guys athletically. I'm always curious, like, do you think that motivation or like will, that internal will that you had to just continually be better, whether it's at wrestling or getting into fighting or building businesses, to, you know, loving parents, 2 kids, age gap, whatever it may be. What do you think creates that type of motivation in one and different motivation in the other? Because you see that a lot.
Mm-hmm. I think a lot of it honestly is genetic, because we grew up in the same exact household. I actually have a younger brother as well, so I have 2 younger brothers, but the one who wrestled and did a lot of the stuff with me was our middle brother. So I feel like we did so many things. Like, we basically had the same course of life all the way through high school together. And I was a senior when he was a freshman. But I feel like that the ability for us to push each other kind of gave him more motivation than what he naturally was given.
Like he was getting from you that extra go.
The brotherly, like, sibling competition type of deal, where we were, because style wise and statistic wise, he is way better athletically as a wrestler than I was. Like, natural wrestling ability was all him. I kind of came in, I worked extra hard on the strength and conditioning side of it, and just the will and the motivation side of it to be great at it and do as well as I did. Whereas he was so gifted that he would beat a lot of the guys that there's guys now that are world and Olympic champs that he would beat as kids, just because he was so athletically gifted and on top of working hard, obviously, but that wasn't with a little push from my dad and myself all the time. So I can't really say exactly what that is, because if you looked at our lives together and if you took them separately and you said, okay, what did he do compared to what did he do growing up, we were in the same exact household with the same exact, both parents in the house, very positive relationship. As you know, there was a tough love aspect of it, but everything was very positive, and we had a lot of fun outside of wrestling. We raced dirt bikes. My dad would come home from tough practices when we weren't feeling great and just drive his truck in the backyard where there's a foot of snow and just do donuts, like just silly stuff. Like, we were always just having fun outside of the sport. So it wasn't something that we were just like, it was pushed down our throat. We enjoyed it, and obviously we got to a point where we were really good at it, but I don't really see where the difference would be other than just genetically, basically out of the womb, of like, this person has more self-motivation than this person, but he knows how to work hard. He just needs that little, kick in the butt sometimes.
It was weird growing up. I shared a very similar, like, I've told this story before, but when I was like 15, my dad brought home a Bowflex. So I wasn't old enough to go to the gym yet, because he had to be, 15 and a half, 16.
I remember those days.
My dad found it legit in the paper, right? And I was skiing competitively, and all the people that I looked up to in the sport were starting to strength train and cross train and condition in the off season. And we did like dry land training, which was like a group prep kind of to get ready for the season. But man, I was chomping at the bit. Like, I could not wait to get in. I don't know, maybe it was like an insecurity, right? Maybe I felt like smaller than some of my friends, or weak, and so that drove me. I don't know what it is psychologically, but my dad found a Bowflex in the newspaper, classifieds, brought it home, put it in his room, and like, the only thing I've been religious about in my life, I hit that thing every single day all summer long, to the point where it like kind of compromised some friendships. Where like, dude, okay, we get it. Like, you want to do a workout. And it came with a little, a pamphlet, where you do your sets and reps. It's got the little diagram. And I made all these photocopies. And so I would just do it until the book was gone and then start over. I knew nothing about like periodization or reps or anything like that, but I just did it all the time. And I would have that conversation with myself a lot, where I'd be sitting there and I'm like, if I just don't do this and I go meet the buddies and we go grab wings or whatever, no one will know. And on top of that, no one will care at all. Literally, there will be no person, not even my family, will come and say, hey, you said you told yourself you would do this and you're skipping a day.
Yeah.
And it was weird because me and my friends were all the same. We all like doing the same stuff, and yet there was this weird. Maybe genetic is the best way to put it. Like there was a weird disposition where I felt obligated to get these things done for no other reason other than I said I would do it, and it just
Hmm.
kept going. And because of that, I've paid attention to that in my life. I always found it really interesting when if we look at like these tracks of you and your brother through your competitive career, where did you see that start to splinter? And what was that like for you as going from kind of this brotherly competition, tough love, you guys are competing all the time, and then seeing that like the change of pace there?
Well, I could honestly say there was a lot of factors that went into it when it did happen, but I think the main thing that I did see was after I graduated high school. That was his freshman year, was my senior year. So after I graduated, he had 3 years of high school left, and there was less um, involvement from my dad on the side of like pushing him at home and keeping him on track on the days that he didn't want to be on track. And obviously, I wasn't there anymore because I was in college. So I would say like his sophomore year and my freshman year of college would have been like the point where I started to, obviously it was just college is a different level, so you have no choice, but I started to really grow and expand in my own way for wrestling where he was kind of staying stagnant and not putting in the extra work and not doing the things that needed to be done to stay elite because he was a wrestler who even his senior year where he wasn't training hard and he wasn't putting in the extra time and effort where he still won a state title. He was beating David Taylor in the dual meet and ended up losing just based off of cardio and conditioning because he wasn't putting in the work and doing extracurriculars and things like that outside of wrestling and class and just not making it first priority like we always did. And so I think that was where we first started to see where if he wasn't being pushed by an outside force, that motivation to push himself wasn't really there.
Got you.
And this is something too that like on a family side of it, this is something that we always have known, but it got brought up a lot more after my dad kind of accepted the fact that he was addicted to drugs and alcohol, and that was part of the reason why he fell off from an aspect of being there all the time for my brother because he knew that if he wasn't going to push him, then nobody was. Because even at our high
Right.
school, it being a high level high school for wrestling, they're not going to push you outside of the practice room. You have to do all the
Right.
other things on your own, and if at the time he's somebody that doesn't want to listen to somebody, he's going to listen to my dad because he doesn't have a choice. He still lives under his roof, and that's the way it
Right.
was. So I think that aspect of it, it's well known now that everybody's on the same page, and my dad's been sober now for I think 6 or 7 months, but it's one of those things that it is a reality, and you can't really blame him for not pushing my brother. But also, that was one of the big things that changed from years before that to that year was if nobody's going to be kicking him in the butt when he needs it, he's just going to that leash is going to get longer and longer and longer until he realizes that yeah, he can still win 99% of the matches doing it his own way, but the way that we did it from day one was he could win 100% of the matches doing it that way. And
Right.
so that was the big change, I think, was the year that I went off to college, and then um, my dad was just on a bad path, and it kind of showed. No excuses from my brother, though. I mean, that was just he knew that he needed someone to push him.
That's it. You said your dad's 6 months sober right now.
6 or 7. I think it was like September or October of last year was when it all like came to a head, and decided that he knew that he needed to be clean just for the health of our family, and being part of everyone's family, because my brother, myself, my mom, like nobody wanted to be around it anymore. It was just getting to a point where it was affecting everybody.
Were you aware of that when you were a kid?
Not as a kid. I would say like my sophomore year of college was when it started to get really bad. Because he would come to all my matches and support me, but he would just be like out of control at the dual meets or at the tournaments, and it was just like it wasn't really like a supportive feeling. And there was even years during like winning the PFL, both of those years, like he was always there to support me, and I felt the love that way. But the way he acted and the way that things were being handled on his like behavior end was just like out of control. Like there was nothing, like no control there, and he was already a really intense guy because he cared about us, and still he cares about us and wants us to be successful. But when you add drugs and alcohol to the mix, it's a completely different person. So that's, I mean, it's a lot, and it was a lot, and there was a lot of things, and it kind of, things that happened during that time, there were things that I tried to mend and had to like, bring up and try to, basically just to keep him going to my fights. Like they didn't want him at my fights, and I was just trying to, make amends with them to be like, look, like he's my dad. I at least want him to be there, even if it's not close to the cage, whatever. But yeah, I mean, there was a lot of turmoil throughout those years, and especially when, when people see that you're starting to do well in your career, and they see big checks coming in, and there's a lot of, I don't know if it was like jealousy or animosity or whatever, but I know that drugs played a huge part of, like him feeling the need to, like guilt trip me into like giving money or like buying gifts for him. Like it just got really crazy, and a lot of it was like just because of the drugs. Like I'd talk to him and he'd be like 110% like out of control on the phone. And it's like there were times I just had to just not talk to him for like a month or two while I was in training camps, because it would literally just take my focus completely off of what I needed to be doing.
As another odd parallel, my dad just hit 11 years sober.
Oh, but, nice.
Dude, it's so wild going through that experience in any capacity, whether it's drugs, addiction, whatever, because I can only, I can speak from my experience, but my father played such an integral role in what I looked up to just in life,
Same
from
here.
What I wanted. He's the general contractor. He's been building houses since he was 17. I looked up to this guy that was always working, always producing things, whether it's a project or this. He's running an Ironman. He's doing this stuff. And I was just like, fuck yeah. Like I got to get stronger. I got to work harder. I got to provide more. So there's all these qualities you're looking up to. And then as I got older, there's like the chaos in the garden thing. You're like, holy shit, like this is a disaster. And then you're faced with this. I was faced with this weird thing in my late teens where like within the family structure, I had to like step up and be this fatherly person to younger siblings, where I'm like trying to be a 17-year-old, and then your father's literally acting like a child.
Yeah.
And like you're confronted with this same exact stuff. Like
It's
you're
exactly
having the conversations with people about a defense, but like you get the behavior, so you're not defending the behavior, you're defending the relationship, and you're saying
100%.
This person matters to me, like inside, and hey, we got our shit, but that's kind of our stuff to figure out. So I don't want you guys to, like it's just a lot to go through, and there's no advice that you can get on it. There's not like a rule book. You can't read about how to handle it, and it's a disease that there's zero self-awareness when they're going through it.
Yeah.
They don't want to hear it.
No.
It's the
And
last
that,
thing they want to hear.
and then they think that you're just attacking them when you do bring things like that up, and it just like creates more of a restriction on the relationship. And like just like what you're saying, I was in my 20s when I had to kind of take the lead, like you were saying when you were 17. But I've always been the one in my family that everyone calls when there's a problem. Like
Yeah.
my dad will call me if he's pissed about something going on with anything, or like trying to figure out something with one of my brothers or whatever. And then like my mom will call me. She doesn't really call me for anything like that until it got really bad with my dad. And then like both of my brothers, like my youngest brother and my middle brother, like they're always calling me to vent. So I'm like the person that everybody like throws their crap on, and I'm supposed to figure it out when like just maybe just because I'm the oldest sibling, I don't know what it is, but I kind of had to, like when all this stuff happened, I literally had to be on the phone with my dad and say, look, you can't do this shit anymore. Like this has to be the end of it, or number one, mom isn't coming back home, and you're gonna have yourself a lot of trouble with
Yeah.
the law or whatever else. Like this isn't gonna happen anymore. And so it's been good. I mean, he had about 8 months before this all went happened again and relapsed for about a year. So this 6 months has been really good. I mean, he still has the same personality. He's still an intense guy. He's still, he's got a lot to figure out, to be honest. But he knows that now that he's sober.
Right.
But I mean, we love him. He's always going to be my dad. He's always going to be somebody who I have looked up to, even as a little kid, as like the strongest person, like the person who can do anything. Like my dad trained exotic animals when I grew up. So like to see my dad like taking tigers on a leash and walking them into the trailer, and like 900-pound black bears, and like making them sit up on a box and they listen to him. You're like, dude, my dad's the best. Like my dad is like, he's the guy that I want to be when I grow up. Like, yeah, I think everybody who has a dad who's present, who loves them and who has a relationship with them, they want to be like their dad. But once you start seeing the chaos and when you see something that your dad can't control, that's when you start to realize that they're not that person, anymore.
Well, it
like
humanizes them
person.
a little bit too. Like I remember,
for sure,
that was the point that it's like it shifted a little of what you thought of your dad, and then you like, I don't know. This also, as I got older, it taught me a lot of empathy. Like the anger and the animosity I felt towards him in those moments when I was younger, when 16, 17, 18, those moments.
Yeah.
I look back on him and I'm like, man, like that was a person in a lot of pain trying to figure out a lot of things. And they were trying to solve a lot of problems that they didn't have the tools to solve emotionally, maybe spiritually, whatever. But like if they had the tools, they would have used them 100%. Because as any person with a family, you love them to death. You would do anything. And so to know that they were in a place where they were in so much pain that they couldn't do that, and they're also such like a man about it that they didn't want to ask for any help, which is
they don't want to ask for help. That's exactly what I was going to say.
It just teaches you. What did that experience, even though it's a little more fresh, like what did that teach you about how you want to be a father?
I would say that the main thing that it taught me is that any type of substance can be abused, and it's not necessarily like you don't have control over it, especially if you have an addictive personality or it runs in your family or whatever the case may be. Anything can take control of your life and basically just ruin it, because that's what it did to him. It ruined, like my youngest brother still doesn't talk to my parents over, the whole situation when he first went to rehab a couple years ago. I mean, there's a lot of things that are like levels to it, I guess you could say, So I think the more you peel the onion back, the more there is. But when it really comes down to it, it just taught me that even though he's, a lot has changed since I was a kid and the person that I saw him as a kid. And I think if I take a step back, I think the first issue that you see when it's your parent is you want to like rewind all that stuff and still see them as that person, even though they're no longer
Yeah.
that person to you. And I mean, we had a lot of times where I was like, I'm not going to talk to this guy ever again because he's treating me this way, and he's treating me like I owe him something for raising me as a kid, and this and that. And it's like, that it's the drugs and alcohol talking, but it's also not like, it's not like you can just erase that.
Yeah.
Like that's in your head. And
I mean, you still have to experience that on an emotional level, right? Like whether they're on the drugs or not, you deal with that.
Yeah, and it's still a thing too where my dad isn't somebody who apologizes for anything. So it's like there was never any apology since, the first like really, I would say like 2018 was really like the first year where I started seeing like, first I was Joe Fighter because I was trying to come up in the fight game, and it was like, the support wasn't really there, even though they supported me competitively. It wasn't like, oh, he doesn't really make that much money fighting, and, why does he do it, this and that. It was kind of like not many people in my family understood it. Then I started to make decent money fighting and started to be able to support myself. And then it was like, it went from like kind of like a jokingly type of thing to like a jealousy type of thing. And it's just like,
well, and you're close in age too. Do you think that has anything, like, does that play into that at all?
With my dad.
Yeah, just like your proximity and age.
Yeah, I would say so. And I think there's just like a lot of things that, honestly, I think it had a lot to do with just the drugs and alcohol because ever since I started fighting, like this has been going on for like 15 years. So there was never a point in my fight career where he was sober. So I don't know any other, like, I don't know how he would be otherwise. Like I haven't fought yet this year to the point where he's been sober, so I have no idea.
Right. How did you, like, as any athlete, I guess you could extend this question to anyone that's successful in their own sport and has a life outside of it, which we all do. There's no pause button, right? So like you could be in training camp, you busting your ass, you're trying to get the belt wrapped around your waist, and you're getting phone calls from every member of your family. And this is not something that, it's private business. So it's not like you're going to stand there in the training camp and go, hey, coach, I'm going to train at 50% today because I'm 50% dealing with the rest of my life. If that's cool. It doesn't work, especially in a sport that's physical like this, where you have to show up for your teammates because iron sharpens iron. You guys all got to be there. How do you compartmentalize these kind of like emotional events in your own life, and then this need to be absolutely laser focused in a sport where not being laser focused means you're out cold on your back, severe injuries that sideline you from your sport? I mean, any lack of preparation has the biggest margin for effect on your life than more than any other sport out there. It's violent. So how do you stay focused like that?
To be completely honest, this is like a exact description of my 2019 season of PFL. Because I had won 2018, and then everybody and their mother was like, "Oh, well, this guy's got money now. Let's call him if we need something or want something." So I dealt with this crap a lot during that year, and training was honestly the only thing where I felt free. Yeah. Like that was the only time of my day where this wasn't, being rang or whatever, where I had it, answering a phone or a text or, him calling me to motherfuck me for no reason about something. It's like, it's, to be completely honest, it was very easy to compartmentalize that year. And that was probably one of my best years when I look at it from a fight standpoint, because I was so focused in training just to get away from all the family BS and the reality
Yeah.
of it. My life at home was great. Like at that time, it was just my wife and I. We just had dogs, no kids, and we were both super busy. And we before we had kids, we were kind of like in our own little worlds. Like she was an IFBB bikini pro, trying to
Yeah.
make it to the Olympia, and I was trying to win the second season of PFL. So it was like we were really good at doing that, and even if we did a long distance a lot, we were used to that for our entire relationship. So the only negative part of my life at that time was like my immediate family, and it was I think it was just like a lot of animosity and jealousy from a lot of people, and the only way I could get away from it was training.
Yeah.
And I think, like, as an honest answer, I honestly can say like that year I feel like I competed at my best because that was my driving force. Like going to
Yeah.
practice got me away from my phone and away from all the hassle from people.
It's one of the reasons. I mean, as a hobbyist, someone who just trains jujitsu and does striking for fun because I'm obsessed with movement and training,
Hmm.
or talking to professionals like yourself and other people who've been on this. I can't like urge people enough to get involved in martial arts on some level, because it is one of the few things where, and I really do think this is unique to martial arts, is that because there's a physical element, that there's a risk for every action. Like if you make a mistake, it gets exploited, and then it's a physical exploitation. It forces you to be present in a way that, like, I surf all the time and I'm present when I surf, but there's a lot of sitting and waiting, and
Hmm.
there's a lot of thinking and mulling over. When I go to training, it truly is like you put your phone in your backpack, and like
Hmm.
you're just in this thing. You're doing it. You're sweating, you're moving, you're breathing, you're working out, you're getting those endorphins release. All these good things are happening, and then you got to be sharp. You got to be on point because there's consequences, and there's something so enriching about that, so healthy, and it's not a prescription medication. And if you get addicted to it, it's only going to make your life better. Like
Yeah.
it really is something special to have, to not even to disconnect, to really actually connect to a thing that's like very specific.
Hundred
But on
percent.
the flip side of that, like looking back on the best season through the most turmoil and family conundrums going on the outside, how do you then assess a season like that and be like, okay, when I'm locked in like this, I'm so good, I'm the best
Hmm.
actually. And then how do you take some of that out so that when things are going well and you're not getting all that stuff that pushes you into being focused in training, how do you like harness that to then find success?
I think I think it's honestly it's one of those things where there's like you just go back to what your focus was when that madness was going on the outside.
Mm-hmm.
Because when it's not like that and you're going to practice, you're like, oh well, I don't really have like I don't mind the outside life outside of practice, so I don't really need to be as focused. Whereas, like you were just saying, like in my sport, I don't have that luxury because if I don't focus in practice, which there's days where I'm not 100% focused, but you get beat up or people are trying to beat you up.
Yeah.
Like if you're not on your A game, which
Yeah.
you can be super focused and still not be physically on your A game if you're in fight camp or you're worn down or just not having a good day in general, but that's the that's the main thing that I go back to is like the last two seasons, like 21 and 22 of PFL, it was mainly a happiness issue. It wasn't really a focus issue. And not really being happy where I was fighting took a lot of the focus away from me because during training camp, I felt great. I would go to practice happy. I was excited to train every day. I was excited to get to the fight. I was excited of who I was fighting for all those fights.
Yeah.
But when I got there and had to deal with the idea of the place that I was fighting at that time, it was just like, man, I really don't want to be here. I really, like, I just didn't enjoy it. And obviously, like, winning is the best revenge, I guess you could say. But in my own head, I was just like, I really just don't want to be here to even win. Like, I don't even care. I just want to go home. And so that was what I mainly struggled with in 2021 was I'd make weight fine and then get in the warm-up room for the fight and be like, man, I don't even want to fight for these people. I just want to go home. Like,
when that
it was
happens,
super weird.
I always wonder as a fan, like when you see, we're all humans. We all have emotions, and part of fighting is promotion. So you gotta put it on. You gotta make people want to watch the fight. If you go up on stage and you say you're scared and you got a lot of stuff going on in your life, who's gonna want to watch that, right? So you sell it. You get up there. There's a lot of bravado, confidence. But I wonder sometimes in the training hall, like I loved skiing to death. I woke up every single day wanting to go to the Olympics. But there were, I would say, 85% of the time I'm in the start gate, it's the last play. I'm nervous. I'm anxious. I don't know if I'm going to win. I don't like the start position. I don't like the weather conditions. The course is too hard. The snow's too hard. Whatever. And that's most of the time. There were very few times where I got in the start gate and I was like, fuck yeah, I'm going to kill this. And everything's great. Yeah. So you see people in the training room getting ready. Are you you're not like telling your team that, right? These are like internal thoughts. You're not sitting there going, guys, I don't know about this one. You can't be thinking about that like moments before you step in a cage to fight someone, right? So what do you do with those thoughts?
It was tough because I'd never really experienced that before in my career, even in wrestling, because like the teams that I wrestled on, I wanted to wrestle for those teams and I wanted to win for my family, my teammates, my coaches. And it was the same with these situations as well, but it was like, I don't want to, like, it was just a whole thing. Like during COVID, like I don't know. I think a lot of people within the community and within my team already knew that I didn't really want to be with that organization after what happened during COVID and not being able to compete, but being stuck in a contract. And it just it was one of those things that lingered for a long time. I couldn't get it out of my head. So even during like training, like I said before, like in the training room, that was my getaway. I was like, heck yeah, I'm getting better. I'm having fun training with my buddies and, you know, my coaches, and everything's good. But when it comes down to fight week and you get there, and well, in 21, we were actually in a hotel for a long time before the fights, just for precautionary stuff. So yeah, I mean, it was a strange time in general, but like when it comes down to it, I think the only thing that I could really think of was like, I don't want to be here. It wasn't that I didn't want to fight. It was just I didn't want to fight here. And it's like,
what is it like? I guess I'll ask you the questions in reverse. But first, what is PFL doing well?
I think they're doing a lot of things well, honestly, and I don't have any ill will towards PFL aside from the way things were handled in 2020. I think that they're doing a great job of trying to build a fan base and trying to build the organization, and you know, bringing on a lot of people who are famous, you know, whether it's famous athletes in other sports or, you know, they had like Wiz Khalifa and some other people buy in as, I don't know if they bought in as owners.
Well, I think they were like celebrity investors. It was like Wiz Khalifa and Kevin Hart. Mm-hmm. So they're definitely making like a public play, mm-hmm. I think, to draw in more like fight adjacent people.
Yeah.
Was it just the situation? It's the entrapment that bothered you, right? Like, I mean, obviously COVID was a weird time, but it must have been infuriating to be in a promotion, looking over the fence and seeing the UFC double down on productivity, double down on fights, and Bellator.
Yeah, I think that was the main thing, is because that was like, I was on an 11 fight win streak. I felt like I was still keeping the momentum rolling. And then the first time I had talked to the CEO about the season getting canceled, he was talking about doing a show before the end of the year, and then so that was like my only hope of getting to fight that year, and it ended up being like 18 months off before my next fight happened. But it was kind of a thing too of, if you can't produce the events when other organizations can, what's the problem with letting us go?
So there was like a contractual jail that you were all in.
Yeah, I mean, I actually went through a whole process of what is it called? It's not a lawsuit. Well, it's sort of a lawsuit, but it's a different name. Arbitration.
Yeah.
So that was like a part of our contract was like you could go into arbitration, but you couldn't file a lawsuit, which is basically the organization has the advantage over the individual in a way.
For sure.
So that was tough. That was a tough situation, and I don't know, that was my main reason that I think that was kind of why I didn't agree with the way things were being handled from the first standpoint, was other organizations are making it happen.
Right.
And the other reason, once we got to 21 for my first fight at 21 in New Jersey, we were doing all the things that we should have been doing in 20. Like a 17-day hotel stay. They had training rooms there. They had us in like a red zone where nobody else could come or go. We couldn't come or go. All your food had to be like delivered to the hotel there, and they would bring it up to your area. So like these are all things that could have been done in 20, but they weren't, and that kind of just delayed. As things delayed and delayed, it just made it worse. And during the George Floyd situation in 2020 was when there was like they posted a big statement about my dad being racist or something, and like that they don't stand with it and this and that. And I was like, what does my dad have to do with PFL in the first place? Like, he didn't my dad had nothing to say about anybody, racist wise or PFL wise. He's not an employee of PFL. He's not involved with PFL other than being my dad. And I think it was just, it was a way for them to just, try and put something out there against my family, because I was already disgruntled about the situation with PFL. That's the only thing I could think of. So there was a lot that went on in 20 that it was just a strange way of how they handled a lot of things. And that's what made me mad, is they have a smart business plan, and everything they're doing is very good, and everything that's going on, like with the ESPN Plus deal and having the ESPN2 deal, and they're trying to change the game, which is great, and it's a great idea. And there's, it's 4 seasons. I think this is season 5 now. It's like, yes, everything they're doing is great. I have nothing against PFL for their business plan, but why did the business plan just stop while they were raising millions and millions of dollars during 2020?
Yeah, that's got to be really frustrating as a fighter too, especially in a sport where, if you're a baseball player, you can go to their batting cage, and you got to deal with the sound of the fans when you get to the pitch. But if you're not dealing with adrenaline dumps and fighting and anxiety and all that stuff in a sport where you can take a knee to the face at full speed, like, you got to be active to keep refining your skill set, because it's different than in training. There's always that added element of competition in any grappling related or striking related sport. It's a different level than training. And you don't want to replicate peak performance in training of any sport. You don't want to constantly be maxing out your lifts. You want to do it periodically over set cycles, because you can't perform at 100% all the time. So it's got to be really, really frustrating as an athlete. So when you decided to part ways, actually, I got a question about their perception from an athlete standpoint. between like PFL, Bellator, previously World Series of Fighting, and the UFC. As someone who's like winning, you're dominant, two-time world champion. You're clearly one of the best in the world when you're doing that. Is there a chip on your shoulder when it's outside of the UFC?
100% there is. Even after winning two titles with World Series of Fighting, where Gaethje came from and Marlon Moraes came from, and they were top contenders, both title contenders in the UFC. And for me to feel like I still had so much to prove, because I really, like, outside of the UFC, you're nothing really. If you
Why
think
is
about
that?
like the fans aspect of it.
Do you think it's because it's like an eyeballs thing? Like there's just not enough outside of like diehard fans who are following the transition of fighters here or there, or people that are just constantly tuning in because they love fight sports,
Mm-hmm.
that it's just not big enough of a name to get to enough people, and so it doesn't feel the same, or like, what is that? Because you guys are all like, you go to the top gyms in the country, you got guys in every promotion,
Mm-hmm.
and they're trained together and they're elite, and you guys are all making each other better. So it's not like Lance Palmer's never seen a good fighter in his life, right? And he only fights these guys. And God forbid he goes to the UFC and just gets steamrolled. It's not like that at all. I mean, you guys are all, you're elite, and you train with elite people, and you have elite coaches. So outside of the fandom, like, what is that that conversation like in the gym or with other fighters, or even yourself?
I guess for myself, it's the UFC is like the cream of the crop. It's been around the longest as far as um, like the title UFC champ is. Like, if people don't know anything about MMA, they ask you if you do UFC. It's the
That's got
same
to be
thing.
just like a kick in the nuts, huh?
It's, I mean, not really. I think it's just like they've done such a good job over the years, like since
Yeah.
day one. Like, it's a marketing machine. Like, they know how to market certain guys. They know how to market the organization in general. They know how to put on great events. Like every event that, like, I was at Jones versus Gone a couple weeks ago, and I was like, dude, this is
Fuck.
like, it was so fun to watch the entire event, because
Yeah.
Cody Garbrandt, he's one of my close friends since we were kids. Like, he was on the card, and a bunch of other, like, he was on the prelim card, like
Yep.
the right before the main card.
It was rad
And
to see him win again. Like,
oh, it was awesome. I mean,
that was so
it was great, because he went through a lot of stuff too over the last few years, and to see him persevere and get back in the win column is it's good for your mental, no matter who you are. Like, to
yeah.
go through all the struggles, and aside from the losses that he's had, it's the times that he didn't make it to the fight because of injuries and things happening
Right.
in his life. So for him to get a win, it means more than just getting your hand raised. There's a lot more outside of the cage that happens for
Yeah.
us just to make it to the fight. So that was super. That was awesome for him. It was really. I'm sure it was an emotional win for him, but seeing that arena be completely full, sold out crowd, on pay per view, and having like just like it gives me goosebumps to think about. Like, I don't get that at any other events. Like,
Yeah.
there's no other fight events I
There's
get
nothing
that
like
at.
it.
Yeah,
I
so I
went
mean,
to
it's the production, the marketing, everything that goes into it. That's why. I mean, don't get me wrong. Like, the top 10 in each division, they're probably, there's guys outside of the UFC that can compete and hang. But when you look at the top 10 and you sprinkle in a couple other guys from Bellator or PFL or ONE FC or somewhere else, you're like, okay, well, like, these are probably close to the top 10 in the
yeah.
world if you put all the divisions together.
I was living in Colorado, but went to the Jones Rampage fight, and I just remember being in the Pepsi Center. I had been to the Pepsi Center for Nuggets games. I'd been to Pepsi Center for Avs games. Like, I walked in and I was like, yeah, I mean, dude, I was like, whoa, this is it. It's like it feels like you're at a WWE, the irony now with Endeavor and
Yeah,
but you feel like you're at a WWE level production and excitement, but it's
yeah,
real, and you're watching something real happen, and it is really special. Even watching that fight, like that brought together friends of mine that don't even watch, like they don't even watch fighting. They're kind of the annoying people to watch it with because they're like,
mhm,
stand them up. They just have
yeah.
no understanding. But that
Just
level,
bleed.
yeah, it brings people together. We watched that fight together and it was fun. You had mentioned Cody coming back from like losses and how much this win means. What did it feel like for you to come out of a 3-loss streak and get a win? Because after a successful career, I can only imagine that each one of those next losses is really nasty on your psyche.
Hmm.
And
They're
like,
compounding.
I can't imagine anything worse. It's not like losing a race where you go, I just got to ski a little faster, or
Hmm.
I gotta do this a little bit better, or maybe I need an extra day in the gym. I mean, the physical where you've already had an insane career and then these 3 in a row, what's each one feel like for you, and how were you having conversations with yourself like is this kind of that point, like do you talk to your coaches about that stuff? What was that like?
I would say that it's the first season back was mainly just like the losses really sucked, and the losses were not fun, and it was just like I didn't feel like myself out there, and I was trying to blame, not wanting to fight for the organization, but at the end of the day, I'm a competitor and I don't like to lose.
Yeah.
So the fact that I let my focus waver in those fights, because I think if I'm focused, I win all 3 of those fights. And I even had,
Focused in the ring, or like leading up, warm up, everything just mentally
I
around
think
it?
a little bit of everything. I think
Yeah.
those, my 3 losses were probably my 3 worst fights in my career, and like even losses I've had before that, like I fought pretty well, but I just lost or didn't get it done. Or like my very first loss, I got caught in a guillotine in the 3rd round. So it's like some of those fights, I was like, yeah, it'd be nice to get that back. And
Right.
two of my first 3 losses, I did get back, but these last 3 losses were more of just like, man, I really don't want to be here. I just want to, get out of this organization.
Yeah.
And I can truly say that when I'm 100% Lance Palmer, I win all 3 times. And I have zero doubt in my mind that, because the fights that I had where these guys couldn't even finish me or do anything to me, and I was just standing there. Like there was no activity on my end. Like if you watch those fights, there was literally nothing. No attempts at anything for 3 rounds each fight.
Right.
So it was very visible, and it was like I didn't even watch any of those fights back because I just knew that I didn't go out there to fight. I was just in the
Yeah.
cage physically, but mentally I wasn't there. There was no want to be there. And I think, like I said, it's compounding because you lose one, okay, you can get that back maybe later in the season or something, but then you lose 2 in a row, and you're like, okay, the guy was tough, but I don't think he's better than me. I just didn't really perform. I didn't really put my best effort out there. And then to go the rest of the year not fighting, and then, in between that is when I did the worlds and stuff for jiu-jitsu, but coming back the next year,
Just
like,
sneak in and clean up there.
yeah, I mean, I had fun doing it, and
Yeah.
that's the thing is like that was the very first time I competed IBJJF, and I competed as a brown belt, and it was obviously a different organization, so
Right.
I was super happy to do it. Nervous as hell because I never competed in jiu-jitsu before, so it was different for me. Like I had to basically learn all the points and everything before like
Did
going
you
into it.
compete in the gi or in no gi?
That was no gi.
So this, I heard you talk about this on Mark Bell's podcast, and I just walking around going, how on earth is Lance Palmer nervous for a no-gi tournament, like given the athletic pedigree, the wrestling pedigree, the championships. And I'm like thinking of when I compete in jiu-jitsu, and like I'm nervous, but it's, equal nerves to like when I competed when I was
Excitement.
younger.
Yeah.
I'm like, there's no way this dude's sitting there like more, because aren't you just confident like you're just gonna steamroll these dudes with your wrestling? Or is it because wrestling's for pinning and there's all these nuances with jiu-jitsu that you could get caught, right, with something slick? It's not to downplay the effectiveness and athleticism of the other brown belts that you're competing against.
For
like
sure.
they're just children and you're an elite athlete. But what was it like? How was jiu-jitsu the thing that gave you the like those nerves?
I think it was the excitement of doing something different for the first time, because I've trained in the gym for a decade on the mats with some of the best jiu-jitsu guys.
Just killers.
Yeah, but when it comes down to actually putting pen to paper and competing, I was like, dude, I've never done this before. Because in the gym, I don't train for points. We just roll and try to finish
each other.
Yeah. So when you think about it, you're just like, never done this before, and I'm going to try and do this. Like, the world, like, it's the world's, like, I don't know. I was just, after I stepped on the mat after the first match, I was like, okay, this is exciting. Like, I'm having fun. It felt like a wrestling tournament again. So the nerves went away after I actually stepped on the mat and competed the first match. But, yeah, I was definitely nervous. And I wasn't nervous in a way of, like in a fight where you can get punched and kicked and everything else. It was more like if I get caught or do something stupid or make some sort of mistake that's just kind of like novice, even though I'm definitely not a novice grappler, but you just, if you've never competed, you're like, oh man, I don't really know what I'm supposed to go out here and do. And I didn't know if these guys knew my wrestling background or not, and I didn't know if they were just going to try and touch me and pull guard. So I had to I had a bunch of trick shots to do and things from the outside to where I could actually get in and get my 2-point takedowns without these guys just sitting and pulling guard on me.
Yeah, I appreciated the notes on strategy of like not broadcasting that you were going to do it at all on the off chance that someone, because we know our brackets before we go, right? So you can look up. I wonder, do you think part of that is like you don't want to be the PFL fighter that lost the jiu-jitsu grappling match?
Not at all. I think it was more, well, I didn't really register until like the last minute. So I didn't even know if I was going to do it, but I was training with other guys that were going locally here. And so it was mainly just, they were all like, dude, you should do it. You should do it. And actually one of my buddies from college, he signed up to it like ultra heavyweight and won it as a blue belt. So it was like, we just like went out there and had a great time and won it. And like, that was it. It was fun. And I trained with Dante Leon, and he was like, man, he's like,
okay.
Yeah, he's all right. And he was like, yeah, man, you should do it. He's like, it'd be awesome. And like, my main thing was just to go out and have fun. And if I lost, I learned, something. So, and even winning, I learned. I learned how different each opponent's styles were, whether they knew that I was a wrestler or not. It was just, and I felt the more that guys opened up against me, the more points I scored on them, or I finished them. So I had a couple finishes and a couple points wins, but I felt that the one guy that kind of tried to keep it tight and not open up against me was the only match that was super close.
Yeah, it's interesting in jiu-jitsu tournaments. One thing that I enjoy about them is when you have a lengthy bracket, it provides an opportunity to do like on the fly strategy adjustment, which is you kind of go into your game, generally what your plan would be, but when you watch your other opponent, it's a unique thing where you get to watch your other opponents feet away from you as you figure out who you're going to go against. And I remember in the last one I did here in San Diego, I knew that in the finals I was going to go against this guy who was very clearly a wrestler, and I did not grow up wrestling. And I knew, I'm like, this is a problem because I know he's conditioned. Being in the fourth match not going to matter for him. So I knew that my conditioning advantages would be negated, and I knew that my lackluster understanding of wrestling probably wasn't going to be that useful. So it would have to be an open guard, spider guard type match. And so it played that instead. And we had such a good match, but you get to make those changes on the fly and see stuff in your opponent that's pretty cool to watch. This does beg the ultimate question, which is, and I don't want to say versus just because I know what you're going to say, but can we assess the benefits of jiu-jitsu and the benefits of wrestling as they pertain to mixed martial arts? What do you think are some places where jiu-jitsu really shows an advantage, and others where obviously, right, wrestling is commanding attention in martial arts over the last decade, and proving more and more that it is a necessity, prerequisite to be effective. But what are some things that one does well that the other doesn't, and vice versa?
I think that jiu-jitsu in general is, obviously you have to know it. Like, you have to know jiu-jitsu if you're going to fight. And there's a lot of guys that, there's some guys who are knockout artists and they don't have much jiu-jitsu at all, but it's something that it's eventually going to catch up. When they get one person who can get that takedown and control them, and they don't have jiu-jitsu to even defend it, it's going to be plain as day. I mean, we saw that with Cyril Gahn. It was pretty evident. But that's wrestling.
That was wild.
I mean, Jones is a wrestling black belt and jiu-jitsu black belt, in my opinion, at any weight class. So, I mean, but that's as plain as day as example as I could give, honestly, is when you look at these high-level fighters, doesn't matter what weight class, there's obviously at the higher weight classes, the style is a lot different, but when you see the effectiveness of jiu-jitsu when they're active right off of the opponent's shot, that's when...
In the sprawl?
Not even a sprawl, just attacking the neck and going for roll-throughs and whatever it may be. It's the offensive jiu-jitsu. I feel like that is way more prevalent than just getting taken down and trying to do jiu-jitsu from your back with your back flat on the mat and the guy pounding your head into the ground. There's so many different ideas of jiu-jitsu to people from an MMA standpoint. But when I look at it, having trained with the Diaz brothers since 2012 on and off, those guys are the epitome of offensive jiu-jitsu on their back. Because even if they did get taken down, they're working different types of guards, they're working triangles, they're working lockdown positions, and they're punching and elbowing the whole time. So the guy on top is on defense now. And I think that's the type of jiu-jitsu in MMA that is prevalent, where there's a different style of jiu-jitsu where, you're just holding and you're in guard, you're trying not to let them pass, but you're not doing anything offensive. Maybe you're not taking any damage, but you're not getting up either, so you're losing the round. When you're offensive from the bottom, even though you gave up that takedown, you're throwing elbows, you're throwing punches, you're threatening with chokes, or you're threatening with arm bars or any type of locks. That's offensive jiu-jitsu in my opinion. If I take a guy down in a fight and he's not threatening to submit me in any way, then he didn't beat me in that round. But if there's a guy that I take down and he's going triangle, omoplata, trying to force my head into a guillotine position, trying to force my arm into a Kimura position, that guy's actively working from the bottom, and that doesn't give me much time for my own offense. And obviously judges are all up in the air, so you can't really say that's a definitive win in the round, but that's my opinion of what type of jiu-jitsu actually will win fights if you get taken down. Even offensively, I mean, on your feet, the more offensive you are off your back, you're going to be more dangerous on your feet as well.
It doesn't seem like you see as much of that. I remember in watching through high school and college, it seemed like there was more from your back offense. I mean, I guess you see that in Charles Oliveira, and there's some guys that do it, but it seems like that was something that was more common.
Yeah.
And then wrestling really stepped in. But how does wrestling affect that? Like, as a wrestler, if you're in someone's kind of open guard or modified guard, and they're trying to, punch block and control your arms and throw elbows or punches to your head or sweep you, what are you doing actively as a knowledgeable jiu-jitsu practitioner with a collegiate and high school wrestling pedigree in that situation?
Well, that's what I was just going to mention is if you're just a wrestler, you're still in danger if you're going against a good jiu-jitsu guy. Because you may be able to take the guy down and like survive in there, but if he's actively throwing submissions nonstop, it's going to be very hard to not get caught in something eventually.
Right.
So especially if you open up to start throwing strikes, like that's when their hips are able to shift and they're able to start using offense. Where just for me, for example, is like I'm not going to stay in your guard, or if I am in your guard, I know what offenses can come my way when I open up. And when I'm throwing strikes, I already know that your hips can shift. When you have to give some space to land strikes from the top.
Right.
So it's obvious from a closed guard, when you open up, they can open up their guard and go for submissions or try to escape. So your main goal is you're like, let's get to half guard where we can control the hips and control our strikes and not be in danger of as many submissions. So I think if you're just a wrestler with no background or no skill set in jiu-jitsu, you're still in a lot of danger there. Even if you get a takedown, you may be able to hold the person down and, kind of just hug the legs and control them there, but you're still not really winning the round if you're looking at it from a fight aspect of it.
Right.
And with someone who has a jiu-jitsu background plus a high pedigree of wrestling, that's a lot more dangerous. You look at a guy like Bo Nickel, who has been doing jiu-jitsu on and off even through his college career, and he's going to be somebody that's going to be really tough in any position on the ground, top, bottom, scrambles, against the fence, whatever. So I think that's the easiest example would be him, probably just because he's so new to the striking.
Can you tell me a little bit about your call from Uriah Faber and like what brought you from the wrestling sphere into mixed martial arts? Because there's a lot of different genesis stories for everyone of how they find themselves in this sport, but it seems like typically there's some pre-existing, like I was getting in trouble all the time, or I was finding myself in fights, but it sounded like that was not the case with you at all, right? I mean, you had an athletic career and a wrestling career, but what was that initial call like, and maybe how long from that call to you going, I really like this. This is what I want to do?
I would say my very first time experiencing the want to eventually fight was in high school. I was actually on a senior trip to Ocean City, Maryland with a bunch of my buddies from high school. We just went there for a few days and just partied and hung out, and there was
Not much else to do in Ocean City.
Yeah, I mean, it really wasn't that that cool of a place, so all we did was drink and get in trouble. But we were watching fights one night, and it was a pay-per-view. I can't remember what fights it was. That was 2006. So we were all just literally, we started fighting in the living room, like just everybody surrounding the TV, and then two guys would get in the middle and just beat the hell out of each other.
It's the most like bro thing of all time.
It really was. It was like, this is what high school guys are doing. Like,
yeah, literally.
Like if you had a girlfriend at the time and you weren't answering your phone, they thought you were out looking for girls when really you're just beating your buddy up on the carpet, getting rug burn.
So they were doing the same shit with me in parking lots. Someone's got a pair of boxing gloves. Half the people have mouth guards. The others don't. Some people are drunk. It's like, what are we doing, man?
Yeah, it's just like that's what high school kids do anyway. But I was never a guy who was like, I would never go out and seek fights. Like we had some fights, like house party fights, like if different schools came to one of our buddies' houses and we weren't cool with somebody, and then it would just break out into like a all-out 30-on-30 type deal. But I would never like go to the
300.
Yeah, like I would never go to the bar and be like, I'm gonna try and get in a fight tonight. Like I was never that guy. I always just liked to have fun when I went out. So, but that was the first time I really saw interest. I was like, man, you started seeing wrestlers coming into the sport slowly. And I was going to Ohio State at that time. It was literally the spring before I went to OSU. And Mark Coleman and Kevin Randleman came from OSU. And so fast forward a year ahead of that, I'm a sophomore at Ohio State. Uriah was in the wrestling room for a Cage Fighter apparel photo shoot because the owner of Cage Fighter at the time he still is in Columbus. So he brought a lot of people to Columbus to do the photo shoots in the wrestling room. So I started talking to him. Coleman was there because Coleman was tight with DeSabato, who owned Cage Fighter at the time. And it was mainly just like, yeah, man, if you're interested in it and it's something you think you'd be good at. And Coleman was always like, he's like, man, your intensity, your style, your wrestling style, you'd be perfect for MMA. And kind of just like the few times I would see him over the years, it would just kind of be like ingrained in my head a little bit of like, man, maybe I could be good at this. It'd be something I want to do. And my only like wonder at that time was like, do you really have to be able to take a punch, or like, can I take a punch, or like, I didn't know back then. Like, I didn't know if you just like could take a punch. You're like, all right, let's fight. Like, I didn't know I had no idea how you like figured out.
I mean, that's a good question. Like, I feel like a lot of people wonder that. They go like, how do you go from being a wrestler to being a fighter? Like, do you do that? Do you stand in a line and someone just punches you and see if you're still on your feet, or like? Because I feel like that must turn a lot of people off.
Oh,
the first
100%.
time you really get cracked, like when they go, okay, cool, you're part of the team. Hey, it's live sparring rounds. Lance, you're with Uriah, and you're like, oh shit, Uriah's like a seasoned WEC, UFC fighter. Now this is crazy. And then like now you're actually training. You're trying to make each other better. So it's not like pitter patter bullshit, and you get cracked for the first time. I gotta say, like 95% of people that experience that probably are like, cool, I don't need that.
There was a lot of guys that came to Team Alpha Male like over the years that I was training there, and they would go through one sparring session and they would just never see him again because every round was a world championship round. Like this is kind of like fast forwarding a little bit, but my very first sparring session at Alpha Male was just like their spar day. It was like Justin Buckles, Danny Castillo, Joseph Benavidez, Chad Mendez, TJ Dillashaw, Uriah Faber. It's like at the time Dustin Akbari, who was my original jiu-jitsu coach, he was actually 5-0, and he was fighting Evan Dunham at Tachi Palace. Like that was like a turning point in his career, and like we had a ton of good guys at that time, and it was one of those things where I was like, oh my God, like these guys, like TJ was just about to go on The Ultimate Fighter. Chad was already in the WEC. Faber was already a former WEC champ. Benavidez had already fought Cruz twice for the WEC title, I believe. And I'm just like, these guys are all killers. Like every round is like a world-class guy, and this is my very first time like throwing a punch. Like I was terrified. I literally just like blast doubled everybody and just tried not to get beat up on the feet. Yeah. But the first couple of times I did take punches, I was like, okay, like I don't like taking punches, but it's not something that deters me from doing this because I think I can be really good at it if I get good enough to not eat a lot of punches in fights.
On those initial sparring days, because I would imagine again that in anyone who has interest so you want to be a fighter, right? Everyone who has interest in it, they're going to have a day where they go to whatever combat gym is in their area. And there's going to be a day when they go, okay, cool, we're sparring. What did that look like? Like how many rounds were you guys doing? How many minutes were the rounds? And then what's the intensity like on a day like that, knowing that they have a new person there? Because if I'm thinking about this, you want to weed people out instantaneously. Mm-hmm. At that level, you cannot have anyone who's second guessing whether or not they want to be there, right? So to some degree, you kind of have to throw people to the wolves. But at the same time, if you see in someone the potential for them to get better, to learn, to adapt, but then also what they contribute, because you're coming in as, you have a lot to offer as an athlete that can help that group of people if you get to the place where you're there frequently.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a little bit of an investment going on too. So what's that initial day like when it is your first time sparring? You're not doing positional stuff anymore. You're not doing power work anymore.
Mm-hmm.
It's not wall drills, but you're actually like, you're tapping gloves and going.
Well, there's kind of two sides to that, because if it's an athlete that's like, I guess you could say, being recruited to the team or being accepted by the team, because we were predominantly a wrestler based team. Like, all of us had some sort of wrestling background for the most part. Um, it it was very hard sparring, and that's all we knew back then. But
Yeah.
if you're coming in as a guy who's like just coming to visit the gym, and you're an amateur and you're just, coming to get some rounds, we had other guys at that level that they could spar outside of the main blue mat. So
Gotcha.
we had people at all levels, I guess you could say, but most people that were coming in, if you're a pro, then yeah, you had to spar with all of us. But if you're, some amateurs were good enough to where they would want to spar with these, the rest of us, and
Right.
there were some that didn't. So they would go with some of the amateurs or some of the other guys who just weren't as skilled, I guess you could say, or guys who just didn't want to, go that hard. But um, you could kind of pick and choose. But if you were in that more of a elite group, like, those were your sparring partners all the time. Like, when I first went there, that was like all those guys, and then a little time came in, and then Andre Feely came to our team from another team, and Josh Emmett came in, and Emmett and I kind of started our careers at the same exact time. And
Yeah.
you look at all these guys, and like, after a few years, Guida started coming to train with us, and then Darren Elkins moved out there, and I mean, we're talking like,
The
you know,
who's who.
yeah, like, we have
Yeah.
like the top 15 featherweights in the world all in our gym, basically. And it was a lot of fun. I mean, there was a lot of we made each other better, and
Yeah.
it was a brotherhood. It was kind of like, I wouldn't want to say like a frat, because I was never in a frat and I don't really know too much about it, but it was more like, we were all like distant brothers in a way, and we took care of each other outside of making each other better and pushing each other and making each other suffer a little bit. Um, but it was always one of those things where, we're there to improve and make each other better. And if I'm not pushing you, then you're not getting better, and I'm not getting better. So even though some of our sparring days were probably a little out of control, it was mainly because that's all we knew to improve. Like, we didn't even have coaches for the most part back then. It was just,
That's so wild to me.
we
That's
coached
one
each
thing that's
other.
been really interesting to watch with mixed martial arts is the athletic, like the development of the athleticism of it. You go back to, I mean, 2006. I'm imagining like Tim Sylvia fighting, and like you got these guys. It was close enough to the brawlery days that it was still
100%.
chaotic, but it was also close to like you're starting to get you're seeing D1 athletes, you're seeing glory kickboxers, you're seeing elite adjacent athletes coming to mixed martial arts. And now you're really seeing, like, I mean, you look at establishments like American Top Team having dorms for athletes to be able to live there and train there. And you have the whole like recovery side of things and how much athletes in general are thinking about their recovery in between times and periodization of intensity. And then you have the UPI, and now the UPI is being built in Mexico. And like, there's so much being put in place to athleticize fighting. And I'm really curious to see what it's going to be like, because you're getting further and further away from those days where it's you guys are 20 killers in a room who somehow have found a sport where that's okay, and you all sharpen each other, and you do it by like the good off your own back and wanting to see each other improve and support each other, and taking pieces from coaches here or there. But it's not like even something like Killcliff, right? Killcliff has like a it's like a production studio of athleticism, from the facility to the sponsorships to even things like cleanliness that you see in like a soccer and baseball and football and basketball. That's an element of professionalism that caters to those sports that you don't see in the grit of like a mixed martial arts gym that's tucked away into a back alley. And I don't know, what do you think that will do to the sport of mixed martial arts? Because you're going to pull a lot of NCAA energy continually. It'll be like a breeding ground for more Bo Nickels and people that are like super elite in that field to come directly into mixed martial arts on like an athletic kind of scholarship track almost. Do you think this will be good or bad for the sport of martial arts, and will it take away that toughness?
It's actually pretty crazy you mentioned that, because I was talking today with a kid that is local here in Columbus, and he's 6-0 or somewhere around there, and he's having trouble getting fights. And Dorian Price, who is in town helping a lot of us out, but he's here for Matt Brown's camp. He's been all over the world training Muay Thai and fighting and coaching fighters, and he's been around forever. And he was even saying, he's like, man, everybody's soft now. Everybody's trying to pad their records, and everybody's trying to, they're taking like the boxing route nowadays of like, I just want to get up to this many wins and not have any losses, and then if I lose in the UFC, it doesn't matter. It's like, it's the social media days and like the do it for the gram days. So, I mean, don't get me wrong, there's tons of really good MMA athletes out there now, but the fighter days are, I mean, Nate Diaz always talks about it. He's like, none of these guys are fighters anymore. Like, everybody's scared to fight. Everybody wants to pick their fights, this and that. And it is true in a way, but also when you look at it from a business standpoint, like each individual athlete is their own business. So we have to take into consideration as well, like what's my best route to a title, or what's my best route to be a champion, or, what's the fight that makes the most sense for me. And so I think there's two different ways to look at it. Look at it from a fighter standpoint of, you fight everybody who's in front of you, which is like, I feel like my generation of fighters is kind of like the last of that. But then you look at people after, even like way before me, is like they just fought whoever. Like there was no like, hey, I'm not going to fight him. I'm going to wait for a title shot. There was,
this is crazy. I haven't really thought about this much, but this is kind of wild to think about. Like, how old are you?
36.
Okay, I'm 34. So when we were in high school and you're watching UFC, you got kind of like chatter from your friends that also watched it, and like maybe you'd see an advertisement on TV, or if you happen to go to a health club that maybe had like a boxing something. But I remember distinctly, like I talked about fighting with a very specific group of people that also thought it was cool, and then the other part of my friend group just didn't care, didn't even know it existed.
Yeah.
And there was no social media. So like when Anderson Silva fights or when Andrei Arlovsky fights, I'm like canceling my plans for the evening to watch it on the TV, and I'm like waiting and waiting, right? The social media aspect is really interesting. It is completely, I literally haven't thought about this at all, of how fights used to promote and how they would just show up to fight each other. You know, had all this like kind of BS, like the back and forth and the finger pointing and the he said, she said stuff that it's just kind of, it's almost odd sometimes. And it in a way, it takes away from the brutality is kind of an interesting word to use, but like the brutality and the rawness of why mixed martial arts is mixed martial arts and WWE is WWE, because WWE banks itself on what's going on behind the stage, in the locker room, the trash trucks and the limousines and all this kind of stuff. And the whole like charade of it is what makes you know it's like fake and stupid, but rad. And then mixed martial arts is so sick because it's like, because I imagine in my head that that's what the gym was like that you were at. That's what I think of when I think of mixed martial artists, is 20 dudes that are truly fighters. And the fact that now, even as, as a 34-year-old who's been strength and conditioning training my entire life, who's been a trainer as a career, has a hobby and a love for Jiu Jitsu and martial arts, and I like to strike and learn about it. The fact that I could even potentially think that there's a pathway for me at this point to get to fighting, right? That I can actually see that. If I, made $1 million tomorrow, stopped doing what I do, and was like, I'm just going to take all my training understanding. I'm going to double down on going to striking class. I'm going to spar more lightly because I don't want to get hurt, right? I'm going to go to training more and I'm going to recover. And I'm going to sign up to do a local, basically a IKF, point fighting competition. And then do that. And I'm going to do a couple of those. And then I'm going to slowly inch my way towards fighting. Whereas your generation is like, hey, you're a really talented wrestler. You want to come to sparring practice with 20 of the best fucking people in the world? And you're like, yeah, that's not, for you to mentally make that jump, that is the fighter. That's that mentality. That's the badass person that's different than what you're seeing now. And to your point, I don't know if it's good or bad. I think that there's, for the enterprise of the individual, it's great, right? Because you can make your own brand, you can manage it, you can call your shots. But there is something a little unbecoming about that as a fan that we're losing.
Definitely. And I believe that it's gotten so much more mainstream too, that a lot of the newer fans or newer followers of the UFC and just MMA in general, they don't know what the old school was like. So there may not even be any thought of it going away. Like the people that are coming on now and becoming fans of the fighters now, or the new fighters coming up, is it's like the whole Jake Paul craze. Like he was a YouTuber and then turned into a boxer and beat a couple old guys, and just one of those things where it was it's kind of weird, and then he loses a close one to Fury, and you have this weird thing of anything's possible now if you have a giant following, or if you have any pool in the world somehow, where back in the day, dudes,
imagine Jake Paul existing in 2008.
Yeah, but think of what's his name? New York Badass or whatever his name was.
MMA?
Yeah. Shoot, I can't remember.
From what era?
He just had something crazy happen to him, but I think he's in jail now. But think of that guy just randomly, Jake Paul wants to fight, and that dude's like, I'll fight this dude. You're fighting a guy who's legitimately just going to try and take your head off. He doesn't care about money or getting paid to drop the fight or anything else. There's nothing that this guy's going to gain from beating the piss out of you. That's
well, that's part of the problem. That's part of the problem is the leverage. If back then, if you didn't fight,
Phil Baroni.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I know what you're talking about. I saw this circling around.
Yeah, that was wild.
But back then, if you didn't fight, where's your paycheck gonna? You have some tap out sponsorships and an Affliction. The Affliction's gonna send you a check or something. You had to fight. You had to do it frequently, and you watched the frequency of those fights were very something I think that PFL does well and Bellator does well with this tournament structures. They have you kind of once you're in the tournament or the season, you're gonna fight. Right. Yeah. As a fan, that's great because then you can count on, you don't have to ride that roller coaster of the expectation and then things falling through or this guy's hurt or that doesn't happen or they can't fly out here. That they're going to fight. And it's something I think that those two organizations, that's a big win for the fans is knowing when you're going to get to watch someone, and that taking out at least in the Bellator structure, you got to fight that guy because he won, not because you did some legalese and the paperwork moved around weird and it got it. So you're always seeing the best contenders go against each other, and I think that there's a lot of strength in that. I feel agree. The UFC will probably depart further from that, given the Endeavor conversion, but it'll be interesting.
I think it's it's going to be interesting to see what goes on from here on out. But from the Bellator perspective, I like the way they do the Grand Prix because
Yeah.
you know the bracket from the beginning, and that's
Yeah.
one thing. Like I know PFL is trying to do their own thing, like they don't want to be that. So,
Right.
but I like the way that Bellator does the Grand Prix because of that. Because like the two regular season fights for PFL, like it's just like a random draw. Like they're just like, oh, this matchup might be good or this might be good. It's like
Right.
you could have like two weird matchups happen and you could win both of those fights but still not get in. Like if
Right.
anything, like the way that it's structured could just be weird on points.
Do you
So
know where uh last I heard you kind of thought May or June you'd have an idea of where you're going to be fighting next? Do you know? Are you able to say where you're going to be going next?
I don't have anything finalized yet, so I can't. But
Okay.
I mean, it's hopefully hopefully somewhere in the U.S. That's really what I'm
That would be
hoping
ideal.
for. But yeah, we'll see.
But there's still the motivation and excitement now that you're out of the PFL is there.
Man, I'm so excited. Like today, just going into spar with, there's a couple up and coming guys that are pros in Ohio that are
Mhm.
training with us, and obviously Matt Brown's getting ready for his fight May 13th, and it's just like there's one guy that was around my size. The other guys are a little bigger than me, but I just had so much fun getting back in there and sparring. I think it was my
Yeah.
first time sparring in a couple months, and shoot, more than a couple months. It's probably been like 5 or 6 months, but um, it felt good. Like it was just refreshing in a way. And I don't. I mean, if people watch the sparring, they'd be like, "I don't think that's refreshing." But
Right.
when you're like, I'm like, man, this is what I do. This is what I've done the last 12 years of my
Yeah.
life. And so that was like during that 18-month period where that I couldn't do that for a living. It
Yeah.
really took a lot out of me, and it was more of it was a weird thing where I felt like I was shackled. And after I was done with this deal and uh, became like I've never been so happy to be a free agent, to be honest. But it wasn't
Yeah.
even. It was at a certain point. It wasn't even about like anybody at PFL. It was just the situation in general. I was ready to move on, and I'm in a really happy place, to be honest. Right now, it's just like I don't know if like a lot of people in the NFL and Major League Baseball, they get called like prima donnas, and even basketball because they want to be traded or they want to do this or that. It's like that is when I started to realize like their situations just get blown up out of proportion a lot of times. But that's when I realized is like if you're not happy where you're competing,
Dude.
you can't compete at your best. It doesn't matter what type of athlete you are, or
Yeah.
if you're the best basketball player or football player in the world. If you're not happy, there's a lot of weight on your shoulders outside of the game of play that you can't just set down and then go on the field and play your best and then leave and then pick that back up. It's
Yeah.
it's with you all the time, and I feel like like I said, it's compounding, so it gets worse and worse as the situation worsens to where when a lot of these guys get traded, they're just excited to be somewhere else. Like
Yeah.
it doesn't they don't even care where they're going. They don't care what it is. It's just elsewhere. And I've never really knew what that meant until this situation. But like don't get me wrong, I loved what PFL does and I love everything that I was able to do there, and it gave me an opportunity to do a lot of great things and be a part of a structure that was so new because a lot of people didn't sign in 2018 from World Series of Fighting because they didn't think that the paydays would be there. They didn't think that this
Yeah.
would even happen, and I was on board with everything before it was even a thought, to be honest. So I knew about it back in 2017, and I was all aboard. And Ray Cepho and Carlos at the time, those were the two guys that were basically running the show for the most part, and they were really good to me. And Ray's always been great to me, and I train at Extreme Couture where he does a lot of coaching and stuff outside of his time at PFL. So nothing but respect for those guys, and they paved the way for PFL to get to where it's at today. To be honest,
Yeah, it's note and empathy for sure. Think about athletes like from the fans' perspective, you just go, oh, they're being babies. They want more money, right? It's kind of what you see because you go, why they have it so good? Why would they want something else? But yeah, if you're not stoked when you're in the training hall, you're not going to train hard. If you're not excited about the team you're on and the people that you're surrounded with, you're not going to perform. It's an individual sport, but there are so many moving parts that go into creating the athlete, and part of that's your well-being. There's two things that we can't leave without talking about. One of them is strength training, yeah. And I'm really curious, like where strength training has an interesting place. I feel like in grappling sports and mixed martial arts, because when you start to train, if you're strong, you realize that that's not the only thing, and until you start to train, you don't really get that, but you see firsthand that technique can outbeat strength in certain situations. And I remember, like, when I started to even just train Jiu Jitsu, I was super humbled, and it kind of floored me, flipped my world upside down when I realized that just being a strong athlete wasn't good enough. Mm-hmm. And then you get into these discussions about the benefits of strength training, what exercise selection should be good, when it should be used, how close to competition. The arguments and ideas go on forever. But you have really cool and nuanced training perspectives with your exposure to Westside Barbell, the exercises that just on like social media that you post. These are unconventional but thoughtful exercises that you really only see when someone's well versed in true strength and conditioning and programming. Mm-hmm. So what is your approach to strength training and mixed martial arts? Like, what fits, what doesn't? How does something like Westside Barbell and they have a very unique approach to programming, for example. How does that fit into a really dynamic sport that might be looked at as like kind of opposing to their view of how to do things?
Well, the great thing about Westside Barbell now is it's become, like, this side of it has become all athlete based. So there's still the powerlifting base, but this is the athlete side of it. So myself, Dante, a couple other fighters, and a couple other athletes. This is like our MMA and like martial artist group. So we have programming that's different from the powerlifters and different from NFL guys and whoever else is training with them. And it's personalized training. Like, this is for us to build our strength capacity and muscle endurance and our conditioning to where it's not just deadlifts and squats and right. super heavy weight. I mean, that's a lot of what the volume is based around, but those are just like the main exercises. All the accessory work and the jumps and the wheelbarrow runs and things like that is all conditioning work, and it's all building that muscle endurance. And it's Tom Berry is the one who's kind of taken that head on at Westside since Louis passed, and really has built something awesome. And I've been going since October 3 times a week, but
with your training output, like with your martial arts output as well, striking and wrestling.
Yeah. So I think it's very important to do the strength training aspect. Just strength training alone, I feel, has to be done outside of fight camp. You're not gonna build any strength while you're preparing for a fight. That's the time where you're trying to build your skill set a little bit and sharpen your skill set more so, and kind of hone in your conditioning a little bit more while touching on those strength things each week, but not overdoing it, because you're not going to gain strength while you're in a meal deficit and calorie deficit,
Yeah.
and you're trying to bring, like, it's just not realistic.
I was gonna say your house must be like on point with nutrition between you and your wife. Like,
It's,
that's
you
got
know
to be
what's crazy
insane.
is once we had kids, there's a lot more like little snacks and candy and stuff. But I'm like a
Weighed out, but
yeah,
still.
yeah. I'm a sugar candy guy. So
Yeah.
like I have a weird addiction when I'm not in fight camp. I have the weirdest sweets and junk food. But yeah, it is. It's one of those things where when we go into a fight camp from the Westside programming, our programming with Westside stops when the camp starts, because that's preparing us for our fight camp into the fight.
Gotcha.
And so then I go into my strength and conditioning phase of more training the body for more endurance and
Yep.
more speed drills and just preparing for a fight. So it becomes more of a what do you call it? Like an applicate, like something I can
It's
apply
like a
to my
dynamic
training.
like a dynamic transition of taking all the strength that you've built and then making sure you can use it. That's
Definitely.
a problem, I think, definitely on the hobbyist side that you see a lot is like people, they're either aimlessly doing CrossFit and doing jiu-jitsu and training, or
Yeah.
they're just deadlifting and squatting their ass off, and then they're going to jiu-jitsu, which is super hip centric, knee centric, crush your back, like get smashed, and then
Yeah.
go load yourself and get smashed. And they're always doing both at the highest level, and they're fucked up all the time. So they don't that undulation or the need for like strength days and dynamic days is really important. Are there? It's just so fun getting strong, though, man.
Well, I enjoy, this is why I enjoy it so much too, though, is the like the amount. So we do this all on an app. Everything is controlled through an app, and we can see
Through Westside.
it's, yeah, it's the app isn't Westside, but it's some
Train Heroic.
program. Yeah, Heroic. Yeah, Train Heroic, I think
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
called. So you can see your volume like for the day.
Yep.
And like the amount of weight that we're doing, because all your sleds are based on like per step. So if you're
Yep.
loading, we're doing forward sleds, backward sleds, sideward sleds, then we're doing upper body sleds where you're basically like grappling as you're pulling the sled with you, and then you're doing it
Yep.
backwards and you're doing it sideways. That's the warm up. So once you get through all of that, you're already at like 150,000 to 200,000 pounds of volume on your body
Yeah.
before you get into your main lifts. And then you have your accessory lifts after. Then you have your box jumps and all your dynamic stuff after that. So it really mixes everything together. It's not just I go in, I lift super heavy, I power lift. Like this stuff has helped me with my muscle endurance while being outside of a fight camp. And that I feel that I've gotten stronger just from the muscle endurance aspect of things, as well as the absolute strength with, the 1 rep max type of stuff like that too.
Where do you're making me really want to buy a sled. It's been on my like the thing that I want to add to my gym is a sled so bad, but the ones that you can get that would work in my driveway are like those really nice new ones with the wheels that the wheels calibrate to the weight.
Oh yeah. Yep.
But they're like I don't want to pay $7,000 for a sled. So I'm like, I'll get the Rogue one that just drags on the pavement. But
Yeah, that's the best one to get, is the smallest one you can get. The small Rogue one.
I have a question about absolute strength, because this is something that I always wonder, like when you're in a fight, because I agree with you 100% about this, like the timing of when strength should end, because you got to be focused on sharpening your skill and getting ready for the person that you're going to go fight.
Mm-hmm.
And you could lose probably 5% of your strength. You're not going to know the difference. But
exactly,
what do you feel when you're in a fight with something? Obviously, muscular endurance is super important, because that's if you gas, you're screwed. So you have to be able to repeat the actions over and over without fatigue and buffer that. But where do you feel like absolute strength, or just literally being physically stronger than the other person, benefits you? Because I assume that at that level, you're both so technical that you're you're not really going to be in like a championship fight and just straight up steamroll the dude with strength, right? Like maybe you will. I don't know. Like maybe that's a strategy. But where do you feel like your strength truly shows itself, and you can kind of point and go, that's because I was stronger than the other person?
I mean, I feel like you kind of touched on it yourself, but when you feel that you can take, especially for me being a wrestler, like if I think that I can take anybody down, no matter what their fence defense is or whatever their jiu-jitsu is on the ground, if I can take them down and cook them and get them tired in those positions, then the striking becomes less sharp when they do get back to their feet, if they do.
Mm-hmm.
And then their footwork's going to be a lot slower because I've already, you started to cook them on the ground, and you're already, you're taking down. Basically, you look at the power meter, like you both started 100 at the beginning of the fight. How can I lower this person's power meter? There's no better way than making them carry your weight and have to try to be as strong as you from the bottom. Because no matter how good you are on the bottom, if you have a guy who knows how to apply his weight from the top position and is super freaking strong, it's going to be very hard for you, even if you get to your feet and escape, to keep up that pace for very much longer in a fight. And so I think that's where absolute strength is huge. Obviously, again, having absolute strength doesn't mean anything if you can't carry it on with your endurance. So the muscle endurance, but the muscle endurance, if you're training both in a periodized programming, they're both growing. So like the muscle endurance is the bottom of the pyramid, I would say, and the top of the pyramid is your absolute strength. So the wider the bottom of the pyramid, the taller the pyramid, right? So you're going to have, the more muscle endurance you have for an extended period of time, and the heavier you can go with your weight for an extended period of time, or the higher the strength for an extended period of time, I feel the more it transfers to, the stronger you're going to be for absolute strength, which could be a lift and return against the fence, or it could be, lifting somebody off the mat to return them back to the mat. Or if you do get taken down, it's the ability to get back to your feet, whether it's using a frame or a stiff arm or, a butterfly to escape from there or sweep somebody. I think that's where the absolute strength really plays in, because one without the other really doesn't matter. Because if you have muscle endurance but you're not strong at all, it doesn't do anything for you. And if you're super freaking strong but get tired in 30 seconds, that doesn't do anything for you either. So that they have to play with each other. And that was something that, even with the little knowledge we had as kids and growing up, that's something my dad was huge on. He's like, we're not just going to be super strong and go into these matches as strong as we can be with good technique. We have to be able to go longer than this other kid's willing to go. So if, we did treadmill sprints, we did Aerodyne bike sprints, we did the basement stairs for time, like we did it with weight vests on, we did it with ankle vests on, like we did the whole gauntlet of strength and endurance training as kids. So doing this stuff nowadays is just, there's more science behind it, and there's, the whoop straps and the intensity things, and knowing your heart rate while you're training, and knowing your fat burn zone compared to your your metabolic zone. There's so many different things now that are available that weren't available then. But when it comes down to it, it's all the same thing. There's just smarter ways of going about it.
How do you, as an athlete whose income, well, you're smart because part of your income is baked into other businesses and endeavors, but there's a misalignment. I don't know if it's a misalignment, but the incentives to take performance enhancing drugs, I feel like, are no greater than in martial arts because of that physical element. Someone's trying to punch you in the face and end your life in that moment. So like, as you get older, it's hard to recover. It just is. Like you can be super smart about your programming, and there's just, whether you've been doing it your whole life or not, it's fucking hard to train strength train 3 days a week, be smart about your volume and your intensity,
Mm-hmm.
go grapple, go strike on a hobbyist level,
Yeah.
let alone a business owner, dad, husband, professional fighter, going from one organization to the other. Like, how do you keep those options out of your brain? Because they're there. One,
Yeah.
we're seeing people get popped all the fucking over the place for
It's
them.
crazy. And
And
I know there's guys that have to be taking stuff that haven't been caught yet.
just, I mean, not to say Connor, but I mean, just look at Connor's head, dude. Just
Oh
look at the
yeah.
guy. Like, if you just look at him and then you don't need it. There's nothing that you have to do other than look at the picture and then look at the picture. Like,
Dude, the
your
craziest
head
thing though, like I don't want
head
to.
doesn't grow.
Yeah, like I don't really want to speak on him for any reason
Yeah.
other than whatever. But
And I have admittedly no place to do so. But
no,
as an
I
example,
just think it's like it's funny that it's become a meme of like he's literally a meme of like everyone knows that he's doing something and has been doing something, whether it's to heal or not. Like, yeah, it is to heal. That's why it's performance enhancing, and we
right.
understand that he went out of the USADA pool for that reason to heal up from surgery or whatever it is, but it still doesn't take away the fact that he's going to come back into the pool and test negative once or twice or whatever they're saying and then fight. The after effects are still going to be there. Am I wrong?
Yeah. No, I mean, I to be completely fair, I don't know enough about the cycling of steroids and then their lasting effects, but all I can imagine is like what you're getting right now, I think, in the sport of mixed martial arts, but also this is definitely happening in jiu-jitsu because you just saw 5 guys get banned at the top for IBJJF, and then IBJJF go, you know what? Sorry, we didn't realize we were going to lose everyone who's keeping the sport alive.
Dude, it's insane.
We're not going to do that anymore. That was just the craziest heel turn, like BS. Just either don't do it or just change the rules. That was crazy that they did that. But
Yeah.
what you're seeing is like, again, with the athleticism, you get the floor raises and rising tide lifts all boats. So what do you get? You get smarter scientists. You get smarter trainers. You get smarter people that have access to better drugs and timing and understanding of these things. And so it's always the guys who get popped always get demonized, right? The Vitors and TJ, and they get blown up on the spot. But the reality is that other people are doing it.
Oh,
Fact.
for sure.
Because you're in a gym and your income and your well-being depends on whether or not you can go and fight this person. And if you've ever trained a day in your life, you're never 100%.
No.
Even when you don't enhance, right? You're
Well, that's what I
always
was just
some
gonna
degree
say,
of
like,
beat the fuck up.
Yeah, like I'm sore as shit right now, and like Tuesday or Monday I did 2 training sessions, and then yesterday I did 2 training sessions, and then I went to one of my jobs and worked the rest of the day, and then today I did 2 training sessions, and then or no, this morning was 1 training session, but it was sparring, and then I went and worked the rest of the day, and it's like, yeah, and I'm 36 years old, so my body doesn't
Right.
heal like it did when I was in my 20s. Like, even when I was in college wrestling, and I'd be like, man, I'm super sore. Like, we'd be doing 2 a days, but 2 a days in wrestling is like, feels like 6
9 a
a
days.
days. Yeah. So it's like, even then, I'd be sore for like a day or 2 maybe, and then you're like, all right, I'm good. And that's
And
on
you're
top
partying.
of like, yeah, that I was just gonna say, like, you're going out all night, not sleeping, you're drinking, waking up for 6 a.m. training, like meeting at the field house, still drunk from the night before, like,
Yep.
and then in your 30s, you're like, you're not even drinking, and you get up and you pull your back trying to get out of bed. Like that's where I was going from the beginning of the October thing with Westside. Is when I went to Westside in October the first time, my back was completely destroyed. Like, I could barely get out of bed. I couldn't lift my kid up out of the crib. Like, I had just so many back issues for like the last 3, those 3 months, like October, November, December. And I went there at first as like a rehab type thing because John Quint, who's involved with FRC, he's a huge proponent of Westside. Like everybody around here goes to him
Yeah.
because he's the man. Like he could fix anybody. And
Yep.
so that was kind of how I started going to Westside and got involved with them. And um, you know, John Quint and Lee Thomas, who's my chiropractor and one of my good friends, like between those two and Tom Barry at Westside, like working through everything and still doing the exercises and learning the whole process of the programming during my rehab period for my back, like going through all that stuff really, like if I didn't do that, my back would still be messed up right now. Like there was a point where I was like, could barely stand up and sit down. I was just constantly in pain, and I have no idea what it was from, to be honest. I think I picked up my daughter out of the crib the wrong way, sideways, and like that's what happens in your 30s. Like all the memes that people see, like that's what you have to look
I know,
forward
it's so
to.
annoying, dude. I had it was at this point, I don't know how many times I've done this in my life, but it's always like the third set of like a 6-set like build up with deadlifts where dude, I've been deadlifting since I was like 15 and I deadlift with like great Olympic lifting competitive form. I know it's okay. And still like there's been multiple times where it's like 2 inches off the ground and I drop the weight and I'm like both hands on my knees and I'm like, the fuck is that? And it's just, it happens, right? Like you could be the most skilled person in the world. You take a back step, you break your toe. I mean, this stuff just, it goes on, but it'll be interesting to see what these organizations do with. It's like the criminals or the crooks are always one step ahead of the cops, you know. So
for sure,
there'll be more fighters in the future who get popped for performance enhancing drugs. The drugs will change. The drugs will get better. They'll become more effective. The fans will love it because we just get to watch TRT Belfort fight people, and it's fucking fun to watch.
Well,
but it'll be.
It's funny you mentioned that too, because like the drugs change and things change of like what you can use and what you can't. Like how it went from before.
Oh, you mean from like what they allow, what they don't allow?
Well, yeah, that too. And I mean, like there was all the peptides came out. You know, they've been around for years now, but all the peptides now, like there's certain peptides that you're not allowed to take for USADA, but it's stuff that technically, if you really think about it, like if they're testing you, like how are they going to test for these peptides? They're amino acid like it's an amino acid complex. So how do they know? Like how are they going to know what that is? Like how are they going to test for some of these things?
I mean, I just went to the dentist today to never got my wisdom teeth out, and I went to the dentist, and I was sitting there in the office, and I was thinking about it. I'm like, they could tell me anything that they want. Thankfully, I've been like referred this guy, the surgeon, by my dentist, but I'm like, dude, you're an athlete. Your job as an athlete, and this is why in some of these instances, I really do feel for in Lance Armstrong's case, I do not feel for Lance Armstrong at all. I think it's bullshit, right? But in some of these athletes, you feel for it. Like you're an up and coming guy. You don't have both your feet on the ground. You're getting established. You're trying to grow your career. You've chosen a really tough career to excel at and establish yourself at. And along the way, someone's like, hey, dude, you look like you're beat up all the time. And you're like, fuck, man, I am. I mean, I'm sparring 6 days a week and I strength train and I'm trying to figure out my nutrition and, whatever. And they're like, cool, well, this here's super safe. You're not going to get popped. Whatever thing that they say, I don't feel like in every case the athlete has malintent and then they just keep pushing that further. I feel like in some cases, of course, the athlete has a responsibility in any sport of ownership, and at the end of the day, it is on them to come clean on that. But when it's in your gym, it's around your people, it's suggested, it's recommended, it's fine, it's safe. Like there's only so much due diligence that you can do without. Your job's not to quit being a fighter, go get a medical degree, and then vet the person's advice that you're getting advice from.
I agree.
And it makes it tough.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think a lot of the discrepancy, too, is when USADA first came into the UFC, there was like a lot of people were like getting popped. I mean, there were people that were actually getting popped for, who was it? He's in Bellator now. he got popped for something, and it was actually in a supplement, and then he was suing the supplement company for like 40 million or 30 million or something.
Well, that's why you see a lot of them are doing like that NSF certified stuff now, to where they like, you know, they back stuff with, I think, like $2 million guarantee. So if you get popped, it's on them, which makes total sense. I mean, you need that kind of governance in a sport where there is a lot of incentive to supplement, especially, which is silly because most people that are taking supplements aren't sleeping well or eating properly. So it's like they're watering their car in the rain. But
yeah, exactly.
You want that kind of regulation so that you can, as an athlete, take something and not like wonder.
Exactly. Yeah, it's a I feel like it's a weird thing too, because there's obviously the people who train and live in the U.S., they get tested the most out of anyone.
Dude, that's the other thing.
Yeah.
They're not flying people to Dagestan
Or New
They're
Zealand
not putting you
or Thailand.
Who was talking about this recently? That like, if you're a U.S. fighter in the UFC, like you're getting tested
disadvantage
constantly, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I'm sure things have changed, but in skiing, like if you're in the pool of tested competitors, it's a 365, anytime, any place.
Yeah,
You're
you
asleep,
have to have
we're waking
your
you up.
location updated.
Dude, like I barely tell my friends where I'm going on Friday.
Yeah, I mean, dude, my wife never even knows where I'm at half the time during the day.
Yeah,
she'll text me like, "Hey, what are you doing today?" Like, "Oh, I'm at a job, or I'm at practice, or
Ask
I'm at
USADA.
my shop." Yeah, so it's like that. It's kind of. I mean, it just happened to one of my teammates at Westside. USADA showed up, or they showed up to his house, and we were at Westside, and he's like, "Yeah, I train every Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday here, 8:30 in the morning. Like it's in my thing." And they're like, "Oh, well, you don't have your location of where you're at. It just says you have training." And he was like, "All right, well, this is where I'm at." So USADA came there and did the testing there, but it's kind of crazy. Like the only good thing I think they do is like that 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. or 6 a.m. or whatever that is, to where they like at least give them time to like sleep, or like don't wake the kids, or like knock on the door with the dogs barking, and like, because every time they knock on the door at your house, it sounds like the cops are there. So it's like they're banging on the door like it's the police, and you're like, dude, the whole house is going to erupt, because if you have kids or dogs, like it's just going to be pure mayhem. And I can see why people get pissed when USADA shows up early in the morning, but like that's what they do every time. Like it's always early in the morning because they're trying to catch people.
Yeah, if you pop at 6, you're gonna pop at 11. You know.
Yeah,
so
yeah. It's like I don't know.
Let me get my sleep.
I mean, who knows? There's probably stuff that people take at like 11:01 that's out of their system by 6:59.
I bet you the. I mean, I in some, as a fan, in some ways, I hope we don't find out about all that. It just sucks because it's part of it. Knowing what I know about training, the output is too high. It's too high. Beyond a certain age, it's so demanding that like that's the big misconception is people like, oh, they take steroids just to get bigger and stronger. It's not why people take steroids. They take steroids so they can recover like they're 22.
Yeah.
And they can, instead of being out late and partying and showing up to practice drunk, they can train again, go to sleep, train, have sparring followed by strength. It's like, that's why people are doing it. And if you can do that, that is a serious leg up on the strength conditioning and preparation side. You can still get caught, right? PD, people get knocked out.
Yeah.
But it gives a degree of leverage. It hedges your bets in a very, very unsafe and unfair way.
For sure.
Helps you recover.
I agree. I mean, you see one thing too is like the amount of volume you have to train just to be able to compete at a high level in fighting is like you see so many injuries because of that. You see people pulling out of fights, and I mean, like Dillashaw with the shoulder injury and like the knee injuries
flying out of his arm in the middle of the fight.
And then you have Brian Ortega with the shoulder issue. Like that was just such a weird thing. And it's like, dude, if you look at the amount of damage we put on our bodies just training, not even like fighting each other, but just training, like hitting pads, bag work, wrestling, jiu-jitsu, strength and conditioning, like all this stuff is breaking your body down, whether you want to believe it or not. And being able, like during a fight camp, your body's not really recovering to its greatest potential. And every year you get older, it recovers a little bit less. So,
Right.
I mean, it is one of those things that's that's why there's a timeline to fighting. And that's why any downtime during that timeline sucks. And that's why, it's anybody who doesn't fight for, like John Jones not fighting for like 3 years and then he comes back.
Best thing that ever happened to him.
It's insane. Like he was just like full of life, like fully recovered, obviously a different weight class. Like it was, I mean, it's great, and only people like John Jones can do that because his fight purses are insane. So it's like, I would fight once a year if I was making a few million a fight too.
That was a wild fight to watch, man. Like, see, you could tell when he was walking out, you could tell he was nervous. He said it afterwards too, but you could tell, like, you could see it. Like, he kind of is realizing the moment. Like all the years, all the wins, they are on the line now. All of a sudden, everything's over, and this guy's a fucking killer, and he just made him look like his little brother.
It was awesome.
That was crazy.
Like John Jones as an athlete and as a fighter, like I respect the crap out of him for just like being so dominant, regardless of like anything outside of fighting or like failed tests or any of the trouble he's gotten in. Like you have to like step back and realize like this guy beat DC after like a weekend of like coke and whatever else, and it's like, dude, that's impressive. No matter what you want to say, like that's not a performance enhancing drug.
I mean, it's like it's that kind of Tyson element. Like you can, I think it's something that's interesting about fighting too, is you can not like the person outside of the ring and you can truly appreciate what they do inside the ring.
Yeah.
And I mean, he's a prime example of that. Well, Lance, it's been freaking 2 hours and 10 minutes. It always flies by, man. And we didn't even get to talk about cars. So when you get back into when you sign your next contract and you get back in your next fight, we'll have to have you back on, and we can talk about all the Hellcats and the Lamborghinis and everything. And it was on my list of things to touch on.
A mini podcast. We'll do
a fight announcement. Just the cars.
Yeah.
Yeah. But dude, thank you so much for giving your time and being on the show and talking about everything. It's been a pleasure having you on, man.
Heck yeah. I appreciate it, man. It was a good time, and looking forward to the next one.